But for now, I just will get started. My name is Kathy Lang, and I work at SUNY ESF in the Open Academy, which is home to our online education programs. And I, in particular, am academic advisor for the Sustainability Management online degree program. So I've been working actually with Office of Career Services in putting together this webinar series. And this is the second of 3 this spring semester. And it is our only evening one, which we may find we don't do again in the future. So thank you for trying it this time. We've been doing them in the afternoon up until tonight. But yeah, so we have one more coming up in 2 weeks, Jody Smits Anderson. And these are folks that work in the general realm of sustainability. And tonight we are joined by someone who I'm going to pass over to Doug Johnson to introduce. Doug is our curriculum coordinator for the Sustainability Management Program and also faculty member in landscape architecture. So I will pass it over to you, Doug. I guess my only other housekeeping item for tonight, because we're so small right now, is that you can unmute yourself. You're welcome to ask questions or comments through the chat, but you also can unmute. I think John is going to keep this fairly casual. So yeah, but we do record it. So we wanted to just record for others to view it down the road. And if you have a suggestions for a future presenter, you can feel free to email me, and that's on the screen right now, and I'll follow up with an email. So without any further ado, Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you'll find that in cases like this, when people know it's being recorded, the audience for these kinds of presentations exist over a much longer period of time than an in-person. So you may get many, many hits later on. So you never know. I think as the series in the professionals in sustainability indicates, that there are many pathways to get to the point where you're involved in sustainability management. And that was part of the founding of the degree program, was to help kind of expedite that or direct that. But this series is really intended to illustrate the experiences of a range of people in a variety of situations in which they're practicing professionally in the field of sustainability in one form or another. So it's kind of strange to be saying this, but so John Pumilio, I would say, qualifies in that count. He is an alum of ESF in environment and forest biology. And it looks like a good portion of his career was in field biology, tracking and counting and observing wildlife in quite a wide range of environments, and I suspect you may talk about some of that. And somehow found his way to Colgate University, where he's the director of sustainability. And in that activity, he has led the college to carbon neutrality, and I assume partially by offsets, but substantially by reducing their direct footprint, which is pretty impressive work. He not only does that for professional work, but it looks like he's also heavily involved in community work, working with the community around Colgate and Hamilton, and helping them achieve their sustainability goals as a climate smart community and a number of other categories. So we're thrilled to have you, and thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. It is to be noted that you're still at work, so Um, Thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to you, John, and you know, let's hear.
Yeah, well,
Look forward to it.
I am thrilled to be here. Thanks, Kathy and Brandon, for inviting me, and Nicholas for being here. I appreciate it. And, hopefully I'll speak as if folks might tune in at, later and maybe glean something off of this, but I will keep it short and try to keep it to the point. But I think, well, for one thing, I want to say that I've always been extremely proud of my ESF, my time at ESF and my degree. I don't know. I mean, after years of kind of bouncing around between professions and doing different stuff, I never regretted or doubted that that was the right degree for me. I loved my background in environmental and forest biology, basically ecology. And, it's important to note that even though 1995, in the scheme of things wasn't that long ago, there was no profession like there is today in higher ed and sustainability. So, I had no idea that I was preparing myself or going to be doing professional level sustainability work like this. And I can, it was long enough ago where I might have forgotten some stuff, but as far as I remember, the word sustainability was never part of my education at ESF. There was no sustainability program at the school. None of the classes did we ever talk about sustainability. In fact, I can probably say with a pretty high degree of confidence that we didn't even really talk about climate change that much. So much has changed in a few years. But the one thing that stayed the same was, I believe that the foundation and understanding the interrelationship of human communities with ecological communities is critically important for a successful career, and even in civil society today. I wouldn't have wanted to be educated in anything else. So it did prepare me well for a profession in sustainability, I believe. But at the time, what I was passionate about was conservation work, basically wildlife conservation. I had an unusual passion, I think, for birds. There weren't a lot of other birders around. I was one of a few. In fact, I don't remember anybody that I graduated with actually being another birder. But I was working for National Audubon Society, and I would spend my summers working on a sanctuary in Maine, where we did environmental education programs. And I remember it was quite a struggle for me because I postponed my Cranberry Lake experience because I was working for National Audubon, and I became one of their youngest ornithology instructors. And I had to forfeit part of my summer to do the Cranberry Lake thing. And that was so much fun. I loved that summer. I took mycology course and I took plant biology. And it was, and the birds were amazing. So it was a lot of fun that summer. My degree in environmental and forest biology did exactly what it was supposed to do. Almost immediately, I found opportunities. One of the first was I was partaking in a research program in Jamaica. Was part of a broader study, but it was looking at bird populations, and we were comparing their survival rate in the winter, comparing different habitats. So I was doing a lot of work in coffee plantations. Today it's pretty common knowledge for most people who know about conservation work, but at the time there wasn't a lot of awareness about shade grown coffee, or the so-called thing called bird friendly coffee. People just drank coffee, and almost all of it came from, basically native forests that were clear cut, and then these plantations were made. And we would do research in there, and we were basically just quantifying what we already knew. And that's that there's no biological diversity, very little in sun coffee plantations. The habitat's destroyed. Coffee is a plant, is a shade plant. So it needs, it grows at its best when it's under the canopy of other trees. So basically what we're doing is we're just going to these different habitats and just comparing the biodiversity, the winter survival rates, all of that stuff. And eventually that, helped to raise the awareness for environmentally conscious coffee drinkers, that they could choose shade grown coffee or organic coffee or bird friendly coffee and those types of things. So when I was in Jamaica, I actually got offered a job to work for the Park Service. I tell people now that I was working in the Everglades on the Florida Panther Recovery Project, because that sounds cool. Like I was working with Florida Panthers in Florida. How awesome is that? But I was not hired for that. I was hired to work on the red-cockaded woodpecker project because it was after Hurricane Andrew, and a lot of the habitat was lost, and we developed a new strategy where I would basically climb trees and then take up a chainsaw and put in these inserts and basically create a home for the species. And you know what? I ended up getting deeply involved in the Panther Project. Those were the two projects that I really did. And one of the reasons why I got so involved with the Panther Project was because, they needed someone to get up in airplanes and track panthers by air, by radio telemetry. So I wasn't flying the planes, of course. We had a pilot, but I had all the telemetry gear. And it takes a while before you can get used to being able to pinpoint, a panther in an airplane using radio telemetry. But it was really important that we did that work. So that was what I did for a few years. I think life, so I was just kind of going along, doing what I was educated to do, and that's environmental conservation work. But I don't think it's impossible really to do this level of work without getting, deeply involved in, on the other side of it, that most of the stuff that we really care about, and the reason why we got into the field to begin with, was because a lot of our healthy natural ecosystems are being threatened, and the wildlife that they support as well. So I went into this, this red-cockaded woodpecker work and the Florida panther work and studying neotropical migrating birds and all of that out of a sheer passion for, to learn about our natural environment. But in each of those cases, of course, they're endangered and their populations were declining. And in the Panther Project in particular, they were, critically endangered. When I was there, we estimated there were about 30 individuals left. That's it. And they weren't, in the first year and a half I was there, I was in Big Cypress National Preserve. There were no known kittens. So they just weren't reproducing. So it was quite possible that we were looking at the last generation of Florida panthers. So what we did is we took cougars from Texas and released them into South Florida. And, they're the same species, different subspecies, and it was meant to be an infusion of genetic diversity back into the population. And it really worked. Almost immediately, once the female cougars, there were 8 of them that ended up being released, within a few months, basically their gestation period, we had kittens. And because we were tracking them, I was tracking them, we were able to discover that the males found the females right away. And so, it was just a way to sort of be involved with a, conservation oriented work. And, but, at the same time, it kind of felt like the work was never going to end, quite simply because they just didn't have enough space to live. So while we, introduced some cougars and it mixed up the gene pool a little bit and it gave them a little, an opportunity to expand a little bit, the fundamental problems were still there. And that was that they didn't have enough healthy habitat or available range to really have a viable population. And I started getting into environmental education a little bit. So on occasion, I would take the work that we were doing and I would do these public presentations. So I would travel around South Florida for these different conservation and environmental groups. And I would talk about the research we're doing and the trouble that panthers were in and how we were trying to preserve them and what the outlook was, if they didn't get more livable habitat, those types of things. And I ended up meeting a group that was a tour group that was coming through South Florida, Marco Island in particular. And I started, they were on a routine schedule, like every week or so, a new group of people would come in and I would meet that group and I would talk to them about the research that we were doing and the conservation work that we were doing with the Panther Project. Well, they offered me a job. So I felt like this is what we need. I mean, if people only knew the issues that not just panthers, but a lot of endangered wildlife, if they were just more aware, then we would do a better job, of conserving species. Looking back on it now, it was naive, for sure. We know that it doesn't work that way, right? Like knowing more doesn't translate into conservation or behavior change even. But at the time, I felt like this was a good thing for me to do. I'm really passionate about conservation, and I get a chance to talk to people about it. And that's what this company hired me for, this tour company. I basically worked in national parks and World Heritage sites, being able to take people on safari. I worked in East Africa, and I spent about 8 years in the Galapagos Islands, taking people through those islands and being able to talk about some of the conservation issues there. And I was fortunate, I think, at a fairly young age to have like a personal, I had a professional mission statement. I knew how I wanted to spend my working career. And basically it was one sentence. I wanted to know that at the end of my professional career, at the end of my working career, I wanted to have a good solid answer for one question. And that's, did I do my part to help ensure that human communities can coexist in harmony with ecological communities? I knew that one person can only do so much, but I just wanted to know, did I do my part in that? And, so the work with panthers and on red cockaded woodpeckers and with neotropical migrating birds, it's a pretty direct line to have a solid answer there. And then for years when I was doing tourism, I had convinced myself that because I was talking about these things and introducing people to it, that I was also doing my part to help ensure that human communities can coexist with ecological communities. Because I was hopefully inspiring people to be more conservation minded. I think the reality is a lot more complicated than that. I had in 2005, I had a writer that came with me on one of my Galapagos trips. He was a pretty well-known writer. He wrote for Outside Magazine and National Geographic, and he was on assignment. He was writing an article. Him and his photographer came. He was writing an article for American Way magazine, and I didn't know all the details of it and anything like that, but he was obviously there. They were photographing, they were talking to a lot of people, they were paying close attention. I had an interview with them, all of that stuff. And then, the writer, Ken McAlpine, great guy. I still keep in touch with him from time to time today. He left, and I continued to do my work. I welcomed the next group and was leading people around. Some months later, I was flying back to the States. And wouldn't you know, I'm on an American Airlines flight, and the in-flight magazine is Ken McAlpine's article. So I picked it up and, I was reading it, and, I don't know if anything ever happens where it's totally punctuated, but it was this confluence of a whole bunch of things. But that article was profound. Even though I knew tourism was causing a lot of problems in the Galapagos, I never really associated myself with that. For somehow I was doing good, right? Like I was there doing positive things. I was educating people, and we were implementing recycling programs, and I was talking about, all the exotic species that were coming in. And you know what? The truth was I was part of that. So, I one of my favorite writers, Barry Lopez, I think he wrote in Arctic Dreams, talked a little bit about if there's a stage at which an individual life becomes truly adult, it's when one recognizes the irony in its unfolding, and accepts responsibility for a life lived basically in the midst of paradox. And basically we have to live the way that we mature and become adult is to recognize the contradiction that we live in. And for me, I was just like, yeah, this is, I'm not doing all, like, I need to really think about my profession and what I'm contributing to. And that was in 2005. And that's when I decided I was going to transition away from tourism. And I worked it in a way where I could work towards my graduate degree. I went to the Evergreen State College in Washington State, and I was able to work on my graduate degree and still run tours from time to time, but I was phasing myself out of it, really. And then 2007 happened. And 2007, I don't know if folks remember, but that was when the IPCC fourth report came out. And it was, it was in the harshest language yet about, the certainty of the human contribution to climate change. And, at the same time, I was working in 5 or 6 different countries a year. I forget how many thousands of miles I was putting, it was just time for a change. Like the contradiction was there, and sustainability began to emerge. This whole notion of sustainability directors or sustainability officers. And, and I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't trained in that, obviously. But I ended up becoming the chair of the college's newly found Sustainability Council. And it was, we were trying to measure our institutional greenhouse gas footprint. And today, it's a pretty straightforward protocol and methodology. I teach my interns all the time how to do organizational greenhouse gas footprints, but at the time it was like the Wild West. There was no, we weren't talking about scopes or what was included or what wasn't. It was, what are things that we're doing that emit carbon and can we measure it? And anything goes, kind of. And there were, a small group of us that were in this similar position that would meet and sort of wrestle with, these questions about how do we measure our footprint and stuff like that. And of course, what follows that is once you have an idea of what your emissions are, you come up with strategies to reduce those emissions. And it's a very rational approach. You can measure things, it's quantitative, and then you can come up with strategies to reduce those emissions. And the nature of the job couldn't be further away from that, because what this is all about is behavior change. And how do you work within an institution to create change when you're working around a group of people? It's not totally like this at ESF, because ESF, we're an environmentally minded place. But when you come to a place like Colgate, very few people have a foundational education in ecology or natural systems or climate systems. And the folks that I work with are very, very busy doing really important things to make the university run. And then here's, someone like me coming in saying, we need to change the way that we're operating. Is there a better, there might be a better way to do this where we could reduce cost and reduce our footprint and maybe be more efficient. And you think, well, if you rationally explain that, change will happen, but it still doesn't happen. So it's really quite a science to understand how behavior change works and organizational change works. And over the years, I learned trial and error about how to work within an institution to help make change. And I think along the way, I've just got like a handful of, I think, take-home points that I really learned. And I'll just sort of rattle a few of them off. There's no science. I never wrote a paper on this or anything else. I'm just thinking, yeah, these are the principles that I try to conduct my day-to-day work by. And one of them is when you're thinking about sustainability, cyclical is better than linear. We could think about that most directly when we're thinking about waste. We buy things, we use them for a short period of time, and then we throw them out. A very linear sort of system. And what sustainability challenges us to do is to think in terms of more cyclical. Can things be used for a longer period of time? Can they be reintroduced into the material stream again at the end of their life? So basically cradle to cradle. Systems thinking is always better than the silos. So when I do programs at the organizational level, I'm always thinking about these, cross-cutting, not working within departments or within these pillars, but thinking about how to bring people across those structures. And I actually think that's a huge benefit to any organization, because I bring people together in the same room who've been working at this institution, for example, for years and may have never met before. So sustainability brings that value to an organization. It strengthens community, I believe. something I learned in my EFB degree was that when you're talking about ecosystems or ecology, that diversity is good. So you don't want a monoculture or one type of anything because it's very vulnerable. So diversity or a mix of life and stuff like that is more resilient. That's a principle that holds true when I'm doing sustainability work. More perspectives, more diversity, more range in viewpoints, strengthens ideas and collaboration. And on that note, collaboration is really important. Early in my career, there was so much work to do that I would just do it as quickly as possible, often making mistakes along the way because I didn't know exactly what I was doing all the time. And it took a while for me to learn that even though collaboration is sometimes an exercise in patience, and it sometimes is clumsy, and you have to work with different personalities, the outcome is usually always better. So collaboration is really important in this line of work, I think. It probably goes without saying that sustainability by definition thinks about the future in the long term. But humans are kind of wired for immediate results, immediate gratification. And sustainability fights that. So I'm often challenging people to be thinking about the longer term impacts of our decisions. So part of that is not thinking so much about first cost only, because we try to do things as cheaply as possible, but think about the ongoing operating costs, the ongoing labor, the ongoing potential regulation or risk that could come in the future. And sometimes making short-term small sacrifices for long-term good makes a big difference. And it doesn't always happen, but I always try to present that to people so that they have what I hope is a more informed opportunity to make decisions. I still believe, even after all of this, that people are inherently good and they want to do the right thing. So I'm constantly working around, folks who may not have the deep appreciation for ecology or the natural world like I do, or totally understand that it's not altruistic. We're not doing these things for the benefit always of, another sentient being. But at the end of the day, healthy ecosystems result in healthier human communities as well. So, sometimes it just takes patience to kind of think about that, especially when environmentalists have been stereotyped so much over the years as tree huggers or getting in the way of jobs and things like that. In a lot of sense, while there is that deep appreciation for our natural world and the organisms that we share the planet with, there's also a recognition that healthy ecosystems result in healthier human communities, and that's important. So we try to get that across. I was mentioning earlier that I would always have a rational approach. So if I approached it very linearly, that people would understand and change would be made. But I now know that the emotional brain wins every time. So you can present the most rational argument, but unless you're tugging on the heartstrings of people or you're making it values-based, it's probably not going to go very far. So the emotional brain is very important. And then the last thing and this is probably the most important, I think, that I've learned along the way. Sustainability is often illustrated in this sort of Venn diagram where these three circles, the economy, the social circle, equity, and then the environment. And I just wholeheartedly and fundamentally believe that that's a wrong way to illustrate what sustainability is. I think that social structures and definitely our economy are wholly owned subsidiaries of a healthy, functioning environment. And without those, we don't have anything else. So when I'm approaching my work or I'm talking to people about this, I always try to say that the pillar that everything else, the foundation that everything else sits on, is a healthy ecosystem that cannot be compromised. We are totally dependent on our natural environment for everything. So, those are just some of the ways that I try to approach this work. And then have a lot of humility and patience, because I've had a lot of my colleagues burn out over the years and leave out of frustration, because higher ed institutions, or most organizations for that matter, are pretty slow moving. People don't change things overnight. So a lot of times it's just, I kind of use the thinking that, okay, well, I have all these ideas on ways that we can make our institution more sustainable. So 10 ideas, I think of sending 10 boats out there. And maybe if I'm lucky, one will reach the other side. And if it does, if I can get one of 10 and I do this long enough, that's probably going to result in a successful program. So I try not to get too, take it too personal or get too frustrated when things don't happen immediately or right away, because it does take time to make this change happen. And, the day-to-day work can be frustrating and challenging. But when I think about Colgate, for example, when I got here in 2009, the university had really no sustainability program to speak of. There was no assessment in higher ed for sustainability programs, except for one, and that was the college sustainability report card. And Colgate was lowest in class. We had a D+ on that report card. And, a little more than 10 years later, back then we had no green buildings. We had no real recycling program. We had no organic garden. We had no energy master plan. We didn't know what our greenhouse gas footprint was. We didn't have any renewable energy. We didn't have any electric vehicle charging stations or electric vehicles. And when you start putting that all together, well, every, day in and day out seems like a grind. When you start lumping it all together, you realize we're making significant progress. And I think that's where the patience comes in. And I think of the same thing with ESF. I often reflect on my time back on campus, and I think, there was no gateway building. There was no, we weren't using wood or co-generating anything, and there was no sustainability office or anything like that. So, it's a lot of progress in a relatively short period of time. So I think at the end of the day, I try to approach this knowing that even though I'm going to work the rest of my life in sustainability, the rest of my professional life in sustainability, I am not going to see the final project. I'm going to have to hand it off to someone else who's going to have to continue this work. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's healthy, and I think that's the way we all have to approach it. And I try to tell my students that, because they're on even a shorter time frame. They want to make a difference at the institution they're at while they're here. And I say, it doesn't always happen like that. You know, you're picking up a project that was started by almost 3 generations ago of students. And, you know, that's just the nature of the work. So I think with that, I'll probably just, you know, stop and see if that made sense to anybody.
Of course, it made sense. I think, you know, if anyone has any questions, now would be a great time to offer, raise a question or probe a little deeper maybe.